She gave 4 years of her life to keep her husband alive. She sold her car. She drained their savings. She slept in hospital chairs. She managed his medications and drove him to treatment twice a week. And she never walked away. Not once. And on the day they buried him, a woman no one had ever seen walked through those church doors with his children. She was composed, dressed in black, 2 teenagers beside her, a boy and a girl, and she moved through that sanctuary like she had every right to be there. She sat in the front pew and fixed her eyes on that casket without looking at a single person. Evelyn Washington, 58 years old, sat 12 feet away and watched it happen without making a sound. By the time that service ended, Evelyn Washington would lose her husband twice in the same morning. And everything she thought she owned, the house, the insurance, the accounts they had built together, would belong by law to a woman whose name she had never heard. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. There are betrayals that break a person suddenly. There are others that break them slowly, document by document, year by year, across a life they believed was real. What happened to Evelyn Washington was the second kind. And what makes this story so difficult to set down is this. The man who did it was not a cold man. He was not a cruel man. He went to church every Sunday. He mentored young men. He held his wife's hand through the worst moments of her life. He was also a man who spent 18 years building a second life behind her back, and he used the final weeks of his life making sure that when he died, that second life would be protected, at her expense, with her money, while she stood in the kitchen and made him tea. Evelyn Washington grew up in Atlanta's West End, one of the oldest black neighborhoods in the city. Her father was a postal worker. Her mother was a seamstress. She watched them work hard, stay faithful, and build something real out of very little. And she carried that into everything she became. She put herself through Clark Atlanta University. She earned her teaching certificate. She spent 29 years teaching 4th graders at a South Atlanta public school, children who would carry her name with them long after they graduated. She was on the usher board at New Light Baptist Church. She organized back-to-school drives every August. She brought food to neighbors when they were sick. She was the kind of woman a community builds itself around without ever having to ask. And when Charles Washington walked into her life in 1995, steady, soft-spoken, with a faith she recognized immediately, she believed God had placed exactly the right person in front of her. For 26 years, nothing gave her a reason to think otherwise. Charles Washington was what people in the community called a solid man. He worked as a senior project manager for a construction firm based in Atlanta. His faith was not loud, but it was constant. Not the kind of man who preached at the dinner table, but the kind who showed up. Every Sunday morning, every deacon board meeting. He coached youth basketball at the church gym for 6 years without ever needing to be asked to return. His co-workers called him dependable. His pastor called him a servant leader. His neighbors said he was the kind of man you could call in the middle of the night and he would answer. He and Evelyn had spent 15 years paying off their brick house in West End together. They had no children, a quiet grief they had made peace with over the years. But they had each other, and from every direction anyone could see, they had a life that looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. Charles Washington had spent a very long time making sure it looked that way. In January of 2019, Charles Washington went to his annual physical and did not come home for 3 hours. When he finally walked through the front door, Evelyn knew before he spoke. 24 years together had taught her to read his silences. He sat at the kitchen table. He folded his hands. Stage 3 prostate cancer. Aggressive, requiring immediate treatment. Evelyn did not cry right away. She held herself together long enough to ask every question that mattered. The plan, the timeline, what they were truly up against. She listened. She wrote everything down on a legal pad. That night, after Charles fell asleep, she went to the kitchen and allowed herself to fall apart alone. Then she dried her face, made a list, and began planning. Because that was Evelyn Washington. That was the woman this man had. And from that morning forward, without hesitation and without complaint, she gave up everything else in her life to keep him alive. Never knowing that for 14 years before that morning, he had already been building a life she was never meant to find. What Evelyn gave over the next 4 years is difficult to fully understand unless you have lived it. She left teaching in the spring of 2019 to be available to Charles full-time. She drove him to chemotherapy at Emory University Hospital twice a week. She sat through every session, managed every side effect, and tracked 12 different medications in a notebook she kept on the nightstand. She rescheduled her own medical appointments 2 years running because his needs always came first. She sold her car to cover costs when his disability payments fell short. She withdrew $140,000 of their shared retirement savings to fill in the gaps insurance would not cover. And she did all of it without keeping score, without resentment, without a single sign of regret, because he was her husband, because she loved him, because in 26 years he had given her no reason to believe that love was not being returned in the same measure. He had worked very hard for a very long time to make sure she never found out otherwise. There were moments, small ones, the kind you explain away when you trust someone completely, when something felt slightly off. Charles had always traveled for work. Construction projects in Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis. A week here, 10 days there. That had been the rhythm of their marriage for years, and Evelyn had long made peace with it. But during his illness, even as his treatments became more demanding, there were calls he took outside. There was a phone she noticed once, plain and black, not the one she knew. It was sitting on the bathroom counter. She asked about it. He said it was a work phone. She moved on. There was a woman's name she heard him say quietly during a call she was not meant to hear. She told herself she was tired and reading into things. She told herself she was imagining problems that were not there. She was not imagining anything. She was simply 4 years away from finding out the truth. And Charles Washington had spent 18 years keeping exactly enough distance between Evelyn and what was real. 2 months before Charles died, something shifted. He became quieter, more deliberate about his privacy. He began asking Evelyn to step out of the room during certain calls. It was something he had never done openly before. Once, he asked her to leave the bedroom while he spoke with what he called his financial advisor. She did not question it. She went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and told herself she was fortunate to have a man who, even at the end of his life, was thinking ahead about her future. She had no way of knowing that the call she had just given him privacy to make was not to a financial advisor. It was to an attorney in Chicago, and the paperwork he was quietly completing that afternoon would ensure that when he died, the woman who had kept him alive would receive almost nothing. He used his final weeks of strength to protect the life he had built behind her. Back, she was in the kitchen making him tea, and she thanked God for him while he did it. Charles Washington died on a Tuesday morning in March of 2023. He passed at home, in the bedroom they had shared for 23 years, with Evelyn beside him. She held his hand the way she had held it through every treatment. She said his name. She prayed over him. Then she called the church. The funeral was set for that Saturday at New Light Baptist. The community came immediately. Food, phone calls, people who had loved Charles for decades arriving at her door. The deacon board organized the program. The choir rehearsed his favorite hymns. Evelyn moved through that week in a grief so deep it had weight to it. She was surrounded by people who cared for her, holding herself upright long enough to honor the man she had spent her entire adult life with. She had survived the illness. She had survived the loss. She believed the hardest part was behind her. She was wrong. What was waiting for her that Saturday morning had nothing to do with grief. and she would not have a name for it until it was already standing in front of her. New Light Baptist Church was packed that Saturday, every pew filled. Latecomers stood along the walls. Charles Washington had touched a great many lives, and they had all come to say goodbye. Evelyn sat in the front pew in a charcoal gray dress, Charles's favorite color on her, with her sister Gloria on one side and the head deaconess on the other. The service opened at 10 o'clock. The choir sang. The pastor spoke. Deacons offered their tributes, and at 20 minutes past 10, the side door of the sanctuary opened. A woman walked in. She was perhaps 45 years old. She carried herself with a composure that is not natural. It is built deliberately by someone who has spent time preparing to walk into a room that is not ready to receive them. Two teenagers walked beside her, a boy of about 16, a girl of about 14. They moved to the front pew on the opposite side of the aisle and sat down. Evelyn Washington saw her the moment she came through that door. Evelyn did not move. She did not make a sound. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched that woman from the edge of her vision for the rest of the service. She watched the way the woman's jaw tightened when the pastor described Charles as a devoted husband. She watched the boy sit with his arms crossed. She watched the girl keep her eyes on her hands. And she watched, at the moment the pallbearers rose to carry the casket out, as the woman pressed one hand flat against her own chest. It was not a performance. It was private. It was the grief of a person who did not know they were being seen. This woman had loved Charles Washington. Evelyn could see that from 12 feet away with complete clarity. What she could not yet see was how long that love had been running and how deeply it had been paid for in time, in silence, and in money that belonged to Evelyn alone. At the repast in the church fellowship hall, the woman found Evelyn in less than 20 minutes. Evelyn was standing with her sister near the food table when she felt someone step close on her. Left, she turned. The woman stood without aggression but without apology. She said her name was Denise Moore. She said she and Charles had been together since 2005. She said the two teenagers with her, Marcus and Brianna, were Charles Washington's children. She said she was not there to cause a scene. She said she needed Evelyn to know who she was. Evelyn looked at her, then at the children standing behind her, then back at Denise Moore. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter and steadier than anyone nearby expected. She said, "Get out of my house." Denise Moore nodded once. She placed a business card on the table, and she left. Evelyn turned back to the food table. Her hands were completely still. Her face gave nothing away. And somewhere inside her, something that had been whole for 26 years was never going to be whole again. 3 days after the funeral, the certified mail began to arrive. The first letter came from a life insurance company. It was a formal notice about the beneficiary on a $500,000 policy in Charles Washington's name. The policy had been taken out in 2008 using marital funds, and Evelyn had been the original beneficiary. But in October of 2022, 5 months before Charles died, the beneficiary had been legally changed. The new beneficiaries were Marcus Darnell Moore and Brianna Renee Moore, the two teenagers from the funeral. The second letter arrived the next morning from a probate attorney in Atlanta. It stated that a trust had been created in 2021 for the rental property Charles owned in Decatur, Georgia, a property Evelyn had believed was part of their shared estate. The trust had transferred automatically upon his death. The beneficiaries were the same two children. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table and read both letters 3 times. Then she sat still for a long while, not crying, not moving, just holding the weight of what those documents were telling her about the last 26 years of her life. The Decatur property was not the only problem. The family home, the brick house in West End, that she and Charles had spent 15 years paying off together, was titled in his name alone. That had happened during a refinance that Charles had managed years before. Evelyn had not checked. She had no reason to. In a 26-year marriage, you do not audit the property title. You do not pull beneficiary documents every few years to make sure your name is still there. You trust, and Evelyn had trusted completely. Without a will, the home would go through probate. Georgia law gave her a claim as the surviving legal spouse, but with Denise's attorney already filing motions, the insurance payout frozen, and the trust already transferred and closed, what lay ahead was going to be long, expensive, and nothing close to certain. The life she had spent 26 years building had become, in less than a week, a legal argument. And she would have to spend money she did not have to fight for what had always been hers. Evelyn Washington did not fall apart. Everyone who knew her would later say that, with a quiet respect that spoke entirely to who she was broken. Broken in the way that only decades of misplaced love can take a person down to the foundation. But she did not stop. She hired an estate attorney named Linda Graves, who had an office on Peachtree. She pulled every financial document she could find: filing cabinet, desk drawer, the lockbox in the closet. She found the insurance papers. She found the trust documents. And then, at the back of the bedroom closet, inside a shoebox buried under a stack of old church programs, she found a black mobile phone. Not the iPhone she knew. A plain device she had never seen before. She charged it overnight. She turned it on the next morning. And the 26-year life she thought she had been living began to come apart. Not all at once, but line by line, photograph by photograph, year by year. What was on that phone rewrote every memory Evelyn Washington had of her marriage. Thousands of text messages going back to 2005. Photographs of Charles at a birthday party, standing beside a woman and two small children. Charles at a graduation ceremony. Charles at a family barbecue in Chicago. A photograph of Charles holding a newborn, dated June of 2007. That was the same month Evelyn had lost their only pregnancy. Voice messages. Calendar entries covering Marcus's football games, Brianna's school recitals, parent-teacher meetings, and school plays. Hotel receipts saved as images. Phone calls that ran 2 and 3 hours long. An entire life preserved on a device in a shoebox, maintained with the same careful attention Charles gave to everything he touched. He had been running 2 families at the same time for 18 years. 2 households, 2 sets of birthdays, 2 women who believed in him fully, and he had held both lives steady, deliberately, without a single visible crack, for nearly 2 decades straight. That is not a mistake. That is a decision made every single day. Over the following weeks, Evelyn's attorney and a private investigator pieced together exactly how Charles Washington had built what he built. He maintained 2 email addresses, 2 bank accounts, a joint account with Evelyn, and a personal account he had opened at a different bank in 2004, a full year before Denise came into the picture. He used Denise's Southside Chicago address as his registered address on certain financial documents. His work travel to Chicago was real, but the projects there were often shorter than he reported. The extra days, sometimes 4 or 5 at a stretch, were spent with Denise and the children. He had attended Marcus's freshman orientation. He had been at Brianna's middle school graduation. According to Denise's own later account, he had told those children that Atlanta was temporary, that once things settled, he was coming home to Chicago for good. He told each family exactly what it needed to hear to stay in place. He gave each woman just enough of himself to make the lie feel like love. And for 18 years, neither of them had reason to look past it. Denise Moore made a limited statement through her attorney. She said she and Charles had met in 2005 at a construction site in Chicago's South Loop. He told her within months that he was separated from his wife and the divorce was nearly done. She had no reason to doubt it. Every time she pressed for more, he had a reason to wait. The process was slow. The timing was wrong. He did not want to unsettle the children. She loved him. Her children loved him. When the diagnosis came, she asked him to come to Chicago so she could care for him. He said the timing was not right. He went back to Atlanta, back to Evelyn, back to the woman who would keep him alive, while Denise waited by a phone that barely rang. Neither woman had been told the truth. They were both living inside a story Charles Washington had written for them separately, with just enough detail to feel completely real. And in his final 2 months, while Evelyn stood in the kitchen and Denise waited in Chicago, Charles Washington picked up a pen and made his final choice about which life he would protect when he was gone. What he put on paper and what it cost both women is exactly where this story goes next. The story moved through the West End community the way these things always do, quietly at first, then everywhere at once. The deacon board called an emergency meeting. The pastor reached out to Evelyn privately. Women who had organized the Repast began comparing notes on small things they had noticed and let go. And then Gerald Washington, Charles's older brother, asked to meet with Evelyn alone. He came to her house. He sat across from her at the same kitchen table where the certified letters had arrived. And he told her that he had known about Denise since 2008. Charles had told him. He had sworn Gerald to secrecy, told him it was complicated, told him it was being handled. Gerald had stayed silent for 15 years because he could not bring himself to destroy his brother's marriage or hurt the woman now sitting across from him. He was crying when he said it. Evelyn Washington, who had held herself together through the letters, the phone, and all of it, looked at her brother-in-law across that table and said absolutely nothing at all. Linda Graves filed on behalf of Evelyn in Fulton County Probate Court in April of 2023. The central argument was direct. Charles had changed the beneficiary on a marital insurance policy, using marital funds, without Evelyn's knowledge, during a period when he was seriously ill and on heavy medication. Georgia law does not automatically guarantee a surviving spouse any portion of an insurance payout when the beneficiary has already been legally changed. But there are recognized grounds to challenge a change made under undue influence or reduced mental capacity. Denise's attorney countered that Charles had been fully competent in October of 2022 and that the designation was a lawful decision made by the policyholder. The judge ordered a complete review of Charles's medical records from that period. The insurance company froze the payout immediately. $500,000 sat in legal hold while 2 women, 4 attorneys, and a judge tried to determine what state of mind Charles Washington was in when he chose to remove his wife's name. The medical records from October of 2022 were detailed and damaging in equal measure. Charles had been on a combination of strong pain medications and steroids that month, following a sharp drop in his condition. His oncologist had documented in writing that Charles expressed serious distress about financial matters and end-of-life obligations. The same records showed that Charles had asked for a private session with a social worker to discuss what he called unresolved personal obligations. Those notes were sealed and could not be obtained. But what the records established was enough. Charles Washington had made a $500,000 beneficiary change during the same month his own. Doctor was documenting him as being in serious distress about unresolved obligations. It was not a definitive case, but it was a foundation Linda Graves could build on. The hearing was set, and then, in September of 2023, 6 months after the burial, the Fulton County Probate Court called Linda Graves's office with something no one had been expecting to find. During a routine review of unprocessed filings, a court clerk had flagged a handwritten document filed by Charles Washington on February the 14th, 2023, 3 weeks before he died. It was a codicil, a formal amendment to a will. Under Georgia law, a valid codicil requires the signature of the person filing and 2 independent witnesses. Charles Washington's signature was there. 1 witness' signature was there. The second witness line was blank. 1 line, 1 missing signature. The document had no legal force. But what it said was this: the family home was to transfer to Evelyn Washington outright, and $80,000 from a private savings account, an account Evelyn had never known about, was to be paid to her upon his death. He had filed it on Valentine's Day. He had secured 1 signature. He had not reached the second witness in time. Whether that person never came, or whether something stopped him in those final weeks, no one has been able to confirm. What is certain is that he ran out of time, and everything he tried to give back remained frozen behind a single blank line. Attached to the codicil by a single paperclip was a handwritten letter addressed to Evelyn. Linda Graves called her and read it over the phone. Charles wrote that he had spent the last 4 years watching her give up everything to keep him alive. He wrote that he was sorry, not the way a person apologizes when they are caught. The way a man writes when the time left is almost nothing, and the weight of what he has done has become heavier than he can carry. He wrote, "I tried to fix it. I know I am leaving too late. I know none of this is enough. But I need you to know that I saw what you gave up for me, and I knew from the day I was diagnosed that I did not deserve it." Those were the exact same words he had said to her in the kitchen the morning he told her he was sick. She had not understood them then. She heard them again now in a dead man's handwriting, and she understood every single word. The letter did not change the legal outcome. It did not make the codicil enforceable. It did not restore the insurance or reverse the trust. What it confirmed was what Evelyn already understood in the deepest part of herself. That Charles had known exactly what he was doing to her, that he had seen it fully for years, and that he had spent his final weeks trying to correct it, too late, too quietly, one witness signature short of making it real. The private account was found. It held $83,000. Denise's attorney moved immediately to block Evelyn's access, arguing the unexecuted codicil had no legal standing. In March of 2024, 1 year after the burial, the court issued its rulings. The insurance payout was upheld in favor of the Moore children. The Decatur Property Trust was upheld. The family home went to Evelyn as the surviving legal spouse, with the full mortgage balance attached, hers alone to carry. The private account was split 60% to Evelyn, 40% to the estate. After legal fees, she walked away with $49,000 and the house she had already been living in. The morning after the ruling, Evelyn Washington drove home alone. She parked in the driveway of the brick house in West End and sat in the car for a while before she went inside. She stood in the kitchen where Charles had told her he was sick, where she had made him tea, while he signed the papers that took everything from her, where the certified letters had arrived one morning after another. She did not do anything dramatic. She put the kettle on. She sat at the table, and she looked at the walls around her the way you look at something when you are not sure it is still yours. She had won the legal right to keep paying for it. She had the walls. She had the mortgage. She did not have the life she thought she had been living. She never had. And now, after the attorneys and the filings and the rulings and the full year of carrying it, she was alone in the kitchen with the truth of that, and no one left to ask why. Denise Moore returned to Chicago. She has not spoken publicly since. Marcos Moore enrolled in a state university in Illinois the following fall, using the insurance funds held in trust for him. Brianna Moore was beginning her junior year of high school. Whether they were ever told the full picture of their father's double life, whether they understood as they grew older what their existence had cost another woman, is not publicly known. Gerald Washington did not appear at any of the proceedings. He and Evelyn have not spoken since the morning he sat in her kitchen. The deacon board at New Light Baptist quietly removed Charles Washington's name from the memorial wall in the fellowship hall 6 months after the rulings. His portrait came down. His name came off the honor roll. A community that had celebrated him for decades did not have a way to hold both the man they had known and the man the documents had revealed. Most of them said nothing. That silence, too, is a kind of answer, and it is one Evelyn Washington has had to learn to live with. Evelyn Washington still lives in the house. She went back to substitute teaching in September of 2023 to cover the mortgage payments. She is approaching 60 years old. She carries that payment alone now, on a substitute teacher's income. Inside a home full of a life she built, with a man who was only ever partly the person she believed him to be. She told a close friend from the church that the hardest part was not the money. The hardest part was the letter, because the letter confirmed that the man she had loved was real. His tenderness was real. His faith was real. And none of it had been enough to make him choose her when it truly mattered. She said, "I can understand a man who never loved me. I cannot understand a man who loved me and still did this." She keeps the letter in the same shoebox where she found the second phone. She has not thrown either one away. Some things you hold on to, not because they comfort you, but because the truth, even when it costs you everything, is still yours to keep. There is a woman sitting in a church pew in Atlanta's West End, charcoal gray dress, hands folded in her lap. 12 feet across the aisle, a stranger is pressing her palm to her chest over a man they both loved. That is the image. That is the moment where Evelyn Washington's life split permanently into a before and an after. Charles Washington was not a monster. He showed up. He was faithful to his church, present in his community, and genuinely caring in both lives he was running at the same time. What he did was not born from cruelty. It was born from a choice, made quietly, sustained deliberately, and never fully corrected even when the paperwork was in his hand and the pen was on the table. One blank witness line, one missing signature, a man who either ran out of time or ran out of courage before he could finish the only honest thing he had ever tried to do for her. Drop your city in the comments right now and tell us what you think. What did Charles Washington truly owe the woman who kept him alive? And if you have not yet subscribed to Blood Betrayer Files, do it now. Because the next file we open, you are not going to see it coming.